I'm Terry Shepard. Being a confident podcast guest is a skill that can be learned. And that's why I wrote How to Become a Dynamic Podcast Guest and Sell Stuff. It's a sweet and short primer that teaches you about the gear, the appearance, and the messaging that can grab and hold today's micro attention spans and motivate your listeners to take action. How to Become a Dynamic Podcast Guest and Sell Stuff. The digital version is just $1.99 at Amazon. Grab your copy today and sell more books tomorrow.
In Conversation with Terry Shepard, award-winning broadcaster, narrator, and author. A deep dive into the writer's craft with the artists and support systems who create the stories we love.
Today's conversation brings us face to face with a storyteller who has spent a lifetime exploring the fragile boundary between trauma and resilience. Dennis Palumbo is not only a licensed psychotherapist working with creative minds, he is also a seasoned Hollywood writer whose credits stretch from the Emmy-winning era of Welcome Back, Kotter to the acclaimed feature My Favorite Year, and most recently consulting on a Hulu series, The Patient. But it's in his fiction where those words collide most powerfully. In Panic Attack, the latest installment in his Daniel Rinaldi series, Dennis drops us into the moment of shocking violence. A sniper opens fire during a college football game, killing a beloved mascot in front of thousands. What follows is not just a hunt for a killer, but a deep dive into the psychology of fear, identity, and survival. It's great to welcome you back, Dennis. Good to be with you.
It's very, very good for me to be here with you, Terry.
How does it feel to be in this dual world experience of understanding the showbiz side, but also having to provide psychological assistance to its practitioners?
Well, it's an interesting, I wear two hats, both as a prose writer right now and as a former screenwriter. I am retired from film and TV, which is why I was so shocked when Joel Weisberg and Joel Fields contacted me, the guys who had created The Americans, one of my favorite TV shows, contacted me and said, "Do you want to be a consulting producer on a new show we're doing called The Patient?" And that shocked me because I hadn't done anything associated with show business as a writer in 30 some years. But it was a great experience. But my normal day-to-day life is therapist by day and prose writer, primarily of mystery stuff, by night. In addition to writing mysteries, I also write a column called Creative Mind for a psychiatric journal called Psychiatric Times. And I write book reviews. And so I get to explore my own creative side while I try to be of help to my patients, primarily who are themselves creative people.
Before we get to Panic Attack, how in the world did you get the assignment for The Patient? And tell us a little bit about what happened after.
I got the assignment because Joe and Joel knew me as a therapist, not because they were patients of mine, but because I'm known in the industry as a therapist who works with writers. I work with directors and actors as well, but primarily work with writers. So they knew my work, and they knew that I had been a Hollywood screenwriter. And so when they called me, they said, "We think you're uniquely qualified to be a consultant on this because you know how shows work, but we also need someone who can tell us how therapists actually talk, how our lead character would react in this situation." Now, of course, I'm thinking I've never been kidnapped and held for ransom, but I'll do the best I can. And that's how that happened. Now, unexpectedly, as we worked on the show, I told more and more of how I work as a therapist, the things that our lead character should say, because it's a very strange situation. The Patient is about a serial killer who kidnaps and holds hostage a therapist in hopes that the therapist will cure his homicidal urges. And the therapist is chained to a bed and then still expected to conduct therapy sessions with this killer. It's a very strange, arcane, bizarre situation which we tried to normalize as much as possible. And of course, part of the psychological journey for our hospice is to go from rage and fear to actually trying to help this guy, actually trying to be a therapist to help him. At the same time, when the guy's not there, off out killing people or whatever, he's trying to escape or convince the guy's mother to let him go, because our killer's mother knows what he does. She just gets drunk and closes her ears and doesn't want to know about it.
And the lead character is one of the biggest names in show business today.
Yes, it's Steve Carell plays the shrink, Dr. Stroud. And he wasn't cast till the scripts were all done. And by that point, I think just by osmosis, Joe and Joel, the therapist became me. And so they gave him a salt and pepper beard. They gave him glasses. He looked and sounded like me. And so even when Newsweek interviewed Joe and Joel, they said, do you notice that your Steve Carell character looks a lot like Dennis Palumbo, the guy you said is your consultant? So I don't give any of this a thought. I just think it's funny because I'm so clueless. I didn't realize what it would be like for my actual therapy patients. It was not a fun experience for those who saw the show. A number of them, quite seriously, were traumatized. In their mind, someone who looked and sounded like me was being tortured and entrapped. And they started saying to me, like, why didn't you try harder to get away? Or why would you treat this guy? And to be honest, it was quite traumatizing to see him in such a vulnerable position. I don't want to give away the ending of the show for anyone who hasn't seen it, but it doesn't end that well for our poor therapist.
Dennis Palumbo was our special guest. He is a licensed psychotherapist with a resume that includes screenwriting and 6 fascinating books with a therapist protagonist. I have to agree that I saw a lot of you in Steve Carell's performance, right down to some visual similarities. It's not surprising that you had patients who felt traumatized by that. What did you say to them to calm them down?
We had to end up talking about what it meant to them, their sense of identification with me, my responsibility to them as a therapist and as a person. So we got into the deeper transference and countertransference issues that are crucial to the clinical relationship, to that connection we had. And they got to experience their level of vulnerability. As one of them said, you better not ever have something like this happen to you. You better not fucking die. If anything bad happens to you, I'm never going to forgive you. And it was striking how dependent they were. And I should have known this, of course, given my 30 years of clinical experience, watching the avatar of me be tortured and dealt with poorly and chained and victimized. It was very impactful for them. But it also ended up being a growth experience in our work. We really understood at a deeper level the countertransference issues on my part and transference issues on their part, the vulnerability we both had toward each other. And if I can jump ship a little bit, one of the things that I've found in the 6 Daniel Rinaldi novels that I've written, he's a therapist, and the novels are written in the first person. And the majority of the mail, emails, and friends that I hear from, they like the plots and the stories and the twists and everything. But what they mostly like is being in the head of a therapist and learning how a therapist thinks. I put you in a number of situations where he is working with patients, and you get a real sense of what a therapy session is like. Particularly the 4th book in the series, Phantom Limb. The first 3 chapters are a therapy session between him and a patient. Now, at the end of that happened, I get hit on the head and she gets kidnapped. That part normally doesn't happen to a therapist, but it does happen to my character, Daniel Rinaldi. But prior to that, it's a regular therapy session. And I've heard from so many people that they have an understanding now and are less afraid and are willing to see therapists now or to seek out a clinician. And they all want them to be like Daniel, my hero, but they don't always get it. But it's important to me that Daniel Rinaldi represents a man with a mission trying to do his very best for his patients.
Let's talk about Panic Attack. The audiobook is about to come out, and it's book 6 in your Daniel Rinaldi series.
It's book 6, and the big excitement for me is all of my books are available as audiobooks, hardcover, paperback, e-books, and if the price is right, I'll come over to your house and read it aloud. But I'm very excited because next week, April 7th, the audiobook of Panic Attack comes out. The reader, Eric Smize, does a great job. And if you're someone who likes to listen to audiobooks as opposed to reading them, I recommend it highly. But I've been very lucky. All the readers of my 6 audio versions of my Rinaldi books have been very good. And this one's really good as well. So I'm very excited for the audiobook to be released of Panic Attack. Also, to be honest, right now, as I said to you in an email, a colleague of mine calls When We Live Now the age of trauma. And if you look at what's going on in the world, what's going on politically, culturally, socially, Panic Attack is about how we deal with trauma, how we deal with fear, and the fact that it pervades our culture right now. And it is a very timely. When I wrote it, I had no idea how relevant and timely it was going to end up being. But it is very much about the times we live in now, where anxiety and depression and suicidal ideation are at an all-time high. And the world feels very unstable and very out of control. And it's interesting because as a therapist, no matter what personal issue a patient of mine is dealing with right now, the events of the world is like this continual background hum that's always there. No matter what you're going through a divorce or your kid's on drugs or whatever the hell's going, you have to do 10 minutes on Donald Trump in Iraq, or you have to do 10 minutes on ICE, or you have to do 10 minutes how we're defunding science. Somehow, unlike previous years, what's going on in the world has infiltrated us to such a degree that it's, like I said, it's a background hum to all my sessions. And it's quite striking.
You and I are from the same generation, and we've seen a lot of things. What does today feel like as opposed to the other swings of the pendulum that you've experienced during your lifetime?
For me, it feels more acute. Now, I think there's a couple reasons for that. Number one, I think it is more acute. I remember what it was like years ago to wake up and not give a thought to the president, whoever the president was. You just assumed whatever they were doing in Washington, that life's going on. But I also think we are definitely the victims of the internet and social media, because no matter I grew up, I was part of the civil rights movement. I marched against Vietnam, but there was no internet. There were no cell phones. There was no constant barrage of information and visuals about how the world was falling apart. Now we're suffused with that. No matter how young you are, you're aware that, as the poet said, the center doesn't hold. Now, I don't think we're all going to hell in a handbasket. I think it will swing back, because all the waves of history indicate that it always does. That said, this is an extremely acute time because we don't have much faith in leadership. Even when things seemed very chaotic, like in the Vietnam War era, for example, and the civil rights movement, we didn't also feel that there was climate change, nuclear proliferation, and regimes that were all over the world being horrible and getting more horrible. And that's what we're seeing now. We live in a time where the richest man in the world, Elon Musk, says the number one weakness in the West is empathy. That's an insane comment. And we're handing over our culture and our society to oligarchs. And for humans to stay human is very hard in a time that is as divisive as this one.
Dennis Palumbo is our guest. He is the author of Panic Attack, a great title for a book because panic attacks are central to the story. What do you want readers to better understand about them?
What I want people to understand is, number one, there's a context to panic. That when we are panicked about something, when we are so filled with fear, that we have the actual symptoms of a panic attack, which has physical symptoms. People who have panic attacks mostly think they're having a heart attack because what they feel is powerful heart palpitations, shortness of breath, sometimes stress in their limbs, and a chaotic feeling in their brain. And it's so important to remember that to not be the victim of your emotional life, you want to recognize these symptoms and do appropriate self-care. You want to stop watching what you're watching that's triggering you, or reading what you're reading that's triggering you. You want to take deep breaths. You want to take a long walk. You want to do the things that you know calm you down. And you also want to remember that anyone would be upset or triggered by these events so that you don't add more stress to yourself by assuming in a shameful way that only I am so weak that I'm reacting this way. Everyone's reacting this way in varying degrees. You're part of what's going on in the world, which is a kind of destabilization. And your job is to protect yourself as much as possible. Ironically, now I hear from a lot of my writer patrons who say, given how, especially this happened, for example, last year during the Palisades fire, when this big fire swept through Los Angeles in the Palisades, I had so many patients say to me, I feel like Nero. I'm fiddling while Rome burns. I'm here trying to make the second act of my mystery thriller work or the second act of my sitcom work while literally Los Angeles is burning. My answer to that is the same one I have now. It has never been more important for storytellers. It has never been more important for writers and artists of all stripes to reach out, to put their work out there and remind us of our common humanity. Because one of the things that happens when things are destabilized is we point fingers, we make enemies of each other, we form orange camps based on political views. And the one thing writers do better than anyone else is remind us of our common humanity, even if it's writing a joke.
How has Daniel evolved over the course of 6 books?
Daniel Rinaldi has evolved his interest in doing the work he does, which is that he works for the Pittsburgh Police. He's a consultant for them, and he is an expert on trauma. His specialty is treating the victims of violent crime, people who've been hijacked or carjacked or who were a bank teller when the bank was robbed or whatever. And he comes by this naturally because before the first book even begins, the backstory is he and his wife had been coming out of a restaurant. They get mugged. Gunshots happen. They're both shot. His wife dies at the scene. Daniel is shot, but he recovers. So now he's got this survivor guilt, and that's the engine of his motivation, his mission, if you would, to work with the survivors of violent attacks, to work with others who either have survivor guilt or more regularly have PTSD symptoms. People who've ever been traumatized know what those symptoms are, where you're constantly vigilant on the look for other dangers. You constantly have flashbacks where you relive in your mind the thing that happened. You often have shame where you go, gee, if I hadn't been walking down that lonely street, I wouldn't have been mugged. Gee, if I had locked the doors of my car, it wouldn't have been stolen. We not only have bad things happen, but then we blame ourselves because we didn't anticipate them happening. And so those are the things Daniel starts to work with. Now, because these are mystery thrillers, he ends up getting involved in the investigation of these crimes. That said, after 6 books, he's become so well known. He's on CNN. He's giving his opinion as a pundit and stuff. And as one of his friends say, a recurring character in the book, he's getting full of himself. And so he always has to watch it that he's not becoming the maven of trauma, that he remembers he's just a guy trying to help other people. And sometimes he knows what he's doing, and sometimes he doesn't. Also, because he is involved in some dangerous things, a close friend of his aunt, Angela, worries that he has a death wish, that maybe at the end of all this, he wants to join his wife, Barbara. Maybe since he feels he should have died when she died, he'll keep doing heroic stuff and going where angels fear to tread until it finally happens to him and he can be at peace.
Consuming written content in audiobook format is a completely different experience from reading it. How did it feel as an author to hear your book performed?
I find it thrilling. I'm always amazed at how emotional I get when I hear a really good narrator say the lines. It's very similar to how I felt when I was a TV and film writer, when I would see actors on screen say the words that I wrote. When Peter O'Toole says something I wrote in My Favorite Year, or when Gabe Kaplan and John Travolta exchanged snarky comments on Welcome Back, Kotter, and I was there and I wrote those things, it's thrilling for me to hear those words and to hear them brought to life. And in my experience as a writer, I find my writing gets better now because now when I write my books or even short stories, I say them aloud. I trained myself now that the dialogue's better and even the descriptions are better because I hear them read. And I was taught that by hearing things read between my showbiz career and my narrators of my novels.
The film you co-wrote, My Favorite Year, is one of those movies we love to return to again and again. It's as relevant, as moving, and as funny today as it was when it was first released. When was the last time you saw it?
God, it must be over 20 years. It's been such a long time since I saw it. And my experience is I was only 28 when I wrote the first draft of that movie. And I'm very much older now. And so I look at it and I go, that's the work of a young writer, because all I see are the problems. All I see is, I don't like that scene. Plus, there were so many people contributing to that film. Norman Steinberg, with whom I share co-screenwriting credit, the on-set ad-libs provided by Mel Brooks and Richard Benjamin, the director. And of course, the cast. To me, My Favorite Year is Peter O'Toole. I wrote it for Peter O'Toole. When it was first at Fox, Fox wanted Michael Caine. Then they wanted Albert Finney. And Albert Finney said, no, you want Peter O'Toole. But Peter O'Toole was not a hot subject right then. And he was not bankable. And so the movie went into what's called turnaround. They didn't make it. And then 4 years later, Peter O'Toole was nominated as Best Actor for a movie called The Stuntman. And he had heat for about 2 months. And in those 2 months, MGM bought the movie from Fox, and they made it with Peter O'Toole. And one of the proudest moments of my life was when Peter O'Toole was being interviewed on a talk show about all of his films. And he said, the only one I'd ever want to do a sequel to was My Favorite Year.
Dennis Palumbo is our special guest. Panic Attack, book 6 in the Daniel Rinaldi series, is coming out soon as an audiobook. What advice do you have for those of us who are trying to be creatives in such a crazy time beyond just going out and doing it? Is there anything else we should be thinking about?
Yeah, the most important thing is the thing that Eudora Welty said, which is that all serious daring starts from within. And everybody has everything they need to be the creative person they want to be. I have so many patients who think, gee, if I only went to the Iowa Writers Conference, or if my uncle was the head of a studio, or if I had an MFA, or boy, Hemingway was so lucky. He had all these World War experiences and he had something to write about. I think everybody has something to write about, because if there's one thing I've learned as a therapist, is everybody has operatic passions. If you talk to the guy that's bagging your groceries at Ralph's, take 10 minutes and find out the guy that he thought was his dad was really his uncle, that there's drug abuse in his family, that 3 people tried to kill themselves, that you listen and it's like a goddamn soap opera. But all you saw was this quiet guy bagging groceries. So everybody has a story to tell. Now, they don't have to tell it as an autobiography. You can tell it as a mystery. Anyone who reads my Daniel Rinaldi stories knows everything I think about therapy, my blue-collar family, Pittsburgh, which is a character in the story because it's where I grew up. And the other thing that's very, very important to remember as a creative person is that everybody thinks the party's happening somewhere else, that you have to be different, that you have to be smarter, that you don't have what it takes to create, and that you may not be entitled, that your voice doesn't matter. And the one thing I've learned over time is that all that matters is our voice. Jean Rise, the writer, said something that I really loved. She said, think of writing as a giant lake, and there's big rivers that go into this lake. And one of the rivers is Shakespeare, and one of the rivers is Tolstoy, and one of the rivers is William Faulkner. And then the rest of us are these little tributaries, little streams going into the lake. And it doesn't matter whether you're the big guy or a little tributary, only the lake matters. And the way I look at it is, I'm a little tributary, but only the lake matters. So you want to contribute to that lake. And as Robert Louis Stevenson said, I have known happiness, for I have done good work.
You have done a ton of interviews like this. You've written a ton of articles. Is there a question that you have never been asked that you wish you had?
I guess the question I've never been asked is about my experience as a mountain climber. I lived in Nepal for a couple months when I was researching a film about a mountain climber named Willie Unsold. And to train for that experience, I did a technical climb of the Grand Teton, and I climbed Mount Rainier. And no one has ever said to me, what was it like to climb the Grand Teton? And I'm happy to tell you, it was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life, because a technical climb of a mountain is really scary. Particularly that moment when there's a big boulder you have to traverse. By that, I mean you're on one side of the boulder and you have to reach over around it with your hand, grab a handhold, and then let go and swing across to the other side.
There's a metaphor for life.
Absolutely. There's a metaphor for life. Absolutely. And the second thing you learn about a mountain is when you are on the summit. You get to the summit. It's so exciting. It's so gratifying. And after about 7 minutes, you and your mountain climbing partner look at each other and go, "Oh, so you about ready to go down?" And it's because the moment you bag a summit, you're done with that mountain. And that's the same with any creative act. The journey toward the goal is the treasure. The moment you get the goal, you have a moment of gratification, and then you want to do it again. A group of therapists got together and sociologists got together in the 30s, and they tried to define what was happiness. And they came up with happiness is successful pursuit of a goal. Not getting the goal. It's successful progress toward a goal. And one of the things about being a creative artist is you're always in process. And being in process serves your skill set. I think we have a responsibility to our gifts. We have a responsibility to our skill set. The best example I've ever heard of this, ever, is in the movie Chariots of Fire, where the missionary who's part of this team at the Olympics running, and his sister goes, "What are you doing with all this running and stuff? Why aren't we all doing missions?" And he said, "God made me fast. And when I run, I feel his pleasure." That's the way I feel about art. Something made you an artist. And when you do it, you feel that something's pleasure. And that's why you should do it.
Dennis Palumbo has been our special guest. Panic Attack is coming soon to the audiobook format. You can find Dennis best by just Googling his name. Dennis, Palumbo. Dennis Palumbo. This has been wonderful, my friend. Thanks so much.
Oh, it's always a pleasure talking to you, Terry. And I hope you edit in such a way that I don't come out like a pedantic jerk. That's always my concern. I go home to my wife and I go, "Look, did I sound like a pedantic jerk?" And she'll often go, "Well, not so much this time." So that's my goal.
In Conversation with Terry Shepard is a copyrighted presentation. All rights reserved. I'm Lisa Davis. Join Terry Shepard next time in Conversation.